When it comes to animated trilogies, I really think that How to Train Your Dragon takes the cake by a long shot, and that's in big part because of how beautifully it executes its character development outside of just the main character. Because obviously, the most noteworthy example of character development is gonna be Hiccup, who, as each film was released, grew up with the audience as the audience grew up with the films. From when we were teenagers to when we were young adults, we were facing the same struggles in our own lives regarding maturity and responsibility as Hiccup was in each of the films. The thing is, now that we're older, the issues that many of us face are different than the ones that initially tied us so closely to Hiccup. A prime example of this is the growing men's mental health epidemic and its increasing prevalence in our day-to-day media. Luckily enough, however, our favorite Vikingfield trilogy can actually still help us out on that one. We just need to shift our focus from Hiccup's character development to that of his father, Stoick. Because when we look closer at Stoick's personal progression throughout each film, we see that it actually parallels how we would ideally shift the ways in which we define masculinity as a whole. And it starts from the very beginning of the very first movie, where the city of Berk is under attack and it's made abundantly clear that Stoick is the manliest man to ever man. He's the Viking warrior, he's the menacing chieftain, and he literally fist fights dragons. Throughout the entirety of the first movie, Stoick remains the manifestation of what we all think of when we imagine the ideal, traditional, manly man. I mean, other than the hand-to-hand combat with mythical flying reptiles, that is. But true to his name, he is in fact stoic, fearless, and a self-reliant leader of his people. And it honestly becomes difficult to imagine that this guy can ever really struggle with anything. But his struggles, and even his character flaws, are immense. The enormous stress of his leadership weighs on him, from trying to protect his people from danger to making sure that they're fed in the upcoming winter. His relationship with his only son is borderline non-existent, with what little remains of it being filled with bitterness and confusion. And, as we later come to find out, he mourns the loss of his wife in secrecy and in solitude. Now here's the tough part. These burdens are actually tied to this image of masculinity that Stoick so firmly imitates and that we so often idolize. Self-reliance and sole leadership, the emotional disconnect from those around him, and the inability to lean upon most other people. These aspects of manhood not only add weight to the burdens of this man of the Viking world, but they do the same to the men of our world. So much so that the American Psychology Association has actually listed many of those characteristics under a term called traditional masculinity, which is kind of like the more formal version of what we think of when we hear the term toxic masculinity. The APA has also shown that the beliefs of traditional masculinity are often correlated to many of the horrors that plague men's mental health today. It's becoming more and more clear that in order to start resolving those issues, we first need to take a look at how we currently define and represent what it means to be a man. And this is where Stoick's character becomes so important as we transition into the second film in the trilogy. The town of Berk is now the complete opposite of what it once was. Instead of beginning the film with a citywide invasion, like in the first movie, we now begin with a citywide dragon racing event. The first film's sense of impending doom has now been replaced with this sense of levity and community. What this now means for our beloved chieftain is that he doesn't need to be as consumed with the burdens of survival that he faced beforehand, which also means that he's no longer defined solely by his ability to just keep his people alive and safe. The town's abundance, along with Hiccup's new scope of influence, end up being the doors that open up space for Stoick to be human. This ends up completely reshaping Stoick's character. He's lighter and he's friendlier, both with Hiccup and the rest of his people. But this change in character becomes especially apparent later in the film when he reunites with his wife Valka, who was taken from him 20 years prior. Valka is understandably shocked and afraid upon their reunion, and she remains that way for a while as the two continue to catch up. Stoick, on the other hand, is again leaning into his humanity. He's emotional and he's feeling, yet he still holds this sense of strength. In fact, he actually uses that emotional fortitude to slowly reignite the love and connection that they once shared. And it even gives me butterflies when he whips out lines like this.
You're as beautiful as the day I lost you.
Me too, Valka, because holy shit, you see, he's leaning into everything that he's feeling in those moments. And that's what allows him and Valka to finally connect with each other once again. This is what makes Stoick such a phenomenal point of reference for how we should choose to define healthy masculinity. He's the perfect example of how strength and emotion are not only far from mutually exclusive, but how the combination of the two actually leads to an even greater character than before. Sure, it may be less showy than the one-man Viking army, but this newer idea of the masculine gives us a much better chance at fostering meaningful connections and living a much more fulfilled life. That is all any of us really want, and it's what a lot of men have really struggled to achieve throughout recent history. So as we move forward and we continue to address the issues surrounding masculinity and men's mental health, maybe we should consider taking a page or two out of our favorite Viking tales. And who knows, maybe we'll also get a glorious beard as a triumphant cherry on top.